Hey guys, welcome back to the VHS Revolution show. I'm David Schumann, and today we have a very special guest. She is an author, a screenwriter, an actor, and a teacher, and her name is Kim Krizan. And if that name sounds familiar, it's because she co-wrote one of my favorite movies of all time, Before Sunrise. Can you believe it? She's here. She's amazing. We had a great conversation about Before Sunrise, and she also picked a great movie to do a rewind about, and that's Love Story from 1970. And we even talk a little bit about her work on Dazed and Confused. She played the teacher, another one of my favorite movies of all time. Guys, this is a real treat. Kim was amazing. Thank you so much, Kim, for being on the show. And let's get to the conversation. So here's my conversation with Kim Krizan on the VHS Revolution show.
Hi, David. How are you?
Good. Thanks for being here. I really appreciate
Oh,
it.
my pleasure. My pleasure. I'm excited to talk to you.
This year, 2025, is the 30th anniversary of Before Sunrise, this movie that you co-wrote with Richard Linklater, and that, to everyone's surprise, became a trilogy of films that has, captivated viewers for years. And you co-created these two characters that really live in our hearts. How is that for
Yeah.
you?
Oh, it's really been an interesting slow build in a way because I think that with time, the film has gained in stature for some people, and a lot of things in life are just a weird matter of like magical zeitgeist or timing, and you cannot predict and you cannot force these things. But I think that people are very feeling very romantic now about the pre-internet era, and they're feeling very wistful about what it is to connect face to face and to meet people without the interference or assistance, however you want to look at it, of social media. We can, back in the day, we did not have some place to go to look people up and to get an idea of who they
Right.
were. And, you just flew by instinct. And there was a romance to that. There was a danger to that, right? So I think young people are wondering what that must have been like. It's like a major turning point in the culture that they're wondering about. And I've lived through that turning point. So I can kind of see both sides now and think about it.
It's funny that you bring that up because June 16th is the anniversary of the date that the movie takes place in, right? That's the day that Jesse and Celine met. And having said that makes me wonder if, of course, nowadays, if two people met like that, they would exchange phone numbers and Snapchats and all the things. But even the idea of two people just connecting and talking and being in a city without any distractions of devices, I don't even know if that would happen these days. Like, that would take such a miracle to even have something like that.
Absolutely. Oh, it would be a bit of a miracle
Yeah.
if that were to happen. I mean, it's a miracle if you get to sit down and read a book these days without distractions and interference. I've heard this generation, this time we're living through, called the shallows.
Mm.
And it's like we're skimming the surface of a lot of information all the time, but we're not digging deeply into things the way we used to. Because I used to have my attention span used to be amazing, and I'd sit
Yeah.
down and read for hours and hours, digging deeply, and just thinking and thinking. Or say, sitting on a train, just looking at people and imagining and observing.
Yeah.
And then if you do meet somebody that you like talking to, there's the whole negotiation of like, do they like talking to me? Do you think, it takes a lot of guts to say, can we continue talking? You want to walk around and that kind of thing. So there were a lot of instinctual sorts of animal skills at play before this technology, which I think it gave birth to a different kind of animal skill maybe, but yeah, it's a big thing.
Well, that brings me to a good question, which is how did you, I mean, I've heard a lot about how you got involved with Rick writing the film, but were you a writer beforehand? Like, how did you guys, I know you were in Slacker, but how did this actually come about between the two of you?
I wanted to be a writer. I was an English major, so I had to read all kinds of books. And when I met Rick, it was actually in this audition for Slacker, I was working on my master's thesis, which was on the diarist Anna East Nin. And so I was working on this long research project, so that I could get my master's degree on a diarist. And I happened to like the diary form because it's, a collection of thoughts and it's a stream of consciousness. And I love that form because it's not really crafted and it just spools out. And so when I had this supposed audition, I really didn't have to act or anything, and I had never acted. He just asked me who I was, what I was doing, and I said, "Oh, I'm working on my master's thesis, and I'm proofreading legislation over here at the Texas Capitol, which is utterly boring." But he was like, "Well, tell me about your master's thesis," and so he kept bugging me to read the thing when I was done with it.
Wow!
And that's how. He wanted to read it, I guess, to see, if it was interesting, if I could write. And then on the basis of that, he asked me to co-write a movie with him. So, yeah, I had wanted to be a writer.
And what was the process of writing the film like for you?
Well, I had no idea how it went. I told Rick right away, I've never written a movie. I don't know how this goes. He goes, don't worry. But he's like, he's and I completely agree with that because I don't think it's particularly helpful to come into any art with a big idea of like what other, structure and what other people do and all that. I think it's better to not know what you're doing because you might do something really fresh, and to not necessarily be the biggest film sort of script nerd in the world. I think it's kind of helpful. So he said, let's just get together. And so we talked, and it was we already had established that we could talk well together. He's the sort of person who's always reading interesting things, and I was always reading interesting things. So whenever I saw him, we would go, "What are you reading? What are you reading?" And we'd like, "What are you learning? What are you learning? And have you seen anything interesting in the news?" And, that kind of thing. So we were idea people. Mm-hmm. And so the process for me was just a big continuation, just a big conversation.
And did you guys, were the characters that we know of as Jesse and Celine, is that who they were on the page? Or did that kind of come about organically after Ethan and Julie were cast?
I think to a large degree on the page, they were Rick and me. So I've had a lot of people say, when they see Before Sunrise, they say, "Well, that's you, that's who you are." And then when Rick and Julie got involved, they put some of themselves into the movies, but mainly they were showing up in that second movie, and then for sure in the third movie. But in the first movie, there was just a lot of me and Rick, I think you could see tone differences, changes. So, there's more of an innocence in those first films and just having fun talking.
Yeah. I saw the film I think I was supposed to see it in the theater on Valentine's Day with a friend. We were going to go see it. I think it's last week in the theaters. I grew up in Vancouver, Canada. Okay. And that night it snowed.
Oh,
and
okay.
so the buses weren't running, you couldn't drive, and so I couldn't make it to the theater, so I couldn't see it in the theater, so I had to rent it on video, months later when it came out. It became kind of like instantly one of my favorite movies. Of course, I loved Dazed and Confused, and we'll talk about that as well. But I think maybe even still, to me, it's like the most romantic movie ever made because of how simple it is.
Why did you like it? The simplicity?
I liked it because, well, I was 17 or something at the time. And even though these characters were a little bit older than me, I loved the idea of meeting someone and not instantly connecting, but connecting just enough that there's this little seed planted and then it continues to grow and build and blossom, if we're using this metaphor, to me was just so great. And the idea that maybe this was, 1990, between 1995 and 2004, it's like, did they ever meet again? Maybe they never met again. Maybe they just went on with their lives and thought about this one magical moment that they had together.
So for you, it was largely like cerebral, like they can they can talk, the intellect, they can exchange ideas, and then that attracts them to one another is that they can talk.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that they're not afraid to share their opinions about things, and that he likes her, I'll call it spikiness, and she likes his kind of boyish goofiness, and at first, right? And that's kind of what draws them together, and that they reveal new layers about themselves as the movie goes on, and
Hmm.
not all of them are great. I mean, while he's kind of like goofy and boyish at first, she can see that that's a little bit of a drawback, even though she's really attracted to him. You know what I mean? They're real people, I guess that's what I'm saying. They're real people. They're not
Yeah.
movie characters plugged into a plot.
It doesn't feel overly formulaic, crafted, that kind of thing.
No, in fact, that's what kind of I found most mesmerizing about it, and still to do to this day, is that it doesn't feel formulaic at all. In fact, even after watching it 50, 60 times, I still can't find the plot in it. Like I still can't see the structure because I get so swept up in the palm reader and the poet, and they're playing pinball and the bartender, like all these great little moments. The phone call at the booth in the diner, that I just don't even think about that stuff. And that's,
Yeah.
I think, the magic of that movie.
I know what you mean when a movie does work, you just experience it and
Yeah.
you're in it and you're not looking at it from the outside like structurally or that's working or that's working. That's a smart choice or whatever. You're just in it. But when a movie isn't working,
Yes.
you pull away and you start going, well, that didn't work, and they needed to, yeah, it's like another part of the brain takes over, and it's nice when you could just sink into something. It means it's working, I think.
Absolutely. Did you guys have conversations, you and Rick, when you were writing it about structure?
No, I think the extent of any kind of conversation like that is that this would be the normal course of getting to know somebody. You'll become more honest over the course of the conversation. You might go a little bit more deeply into some things. At first you're nervous and, don't know what to say and trying to impress one another a little bit. And then as things go on, you go more deeply into it and say how you're feeling, and then maybe there's tension and anxiety as you realize it's going to end. So we did not talk about structure, but the true fact is that I did not know film structure. I think that I had just absorbed it organically from having read so many books. And I honestly believe this is just a human thing, is that I think structure is a lot more simple than people think. I think it's just, you have characters who have a problem, they go on a journey, so there's an arc, and then you've got to end the story. And so, it's very interesting that people like they think you've got to have this on this page and this on this page, and it's
Right.
not really
The
true.
midpoint, the 30 minutes, yeah, all that, the third
No,
act.
that can dry it out. I
Yeah.
mean, sometimes people do that brilliantly, and it's like an amazing journey, and we forget where we're about these devices. But I think really stories are just about characters who have problems, and then we've got to cut it off at the end. We've just got to end it, and where you end it creates the story in so many ways, because if you end it with them separating when they like each other, that's a romance. It's a wistful romance, you know.
Yeah, there's not much, what you would consider like typical conflict in the film, except the conflict is what's going to happen at the end of the day, when he has to get on the train and she has to leave. Like
Yeah.
that's the overarching conflict that's kind of built into every scene in the film. And then there's the little conflicts of like, well, she loves the palm reader and he thinks the palm reader is kind of a scammer, and same with the poet. Because again, that just feels real. That just feels like people.
I like subtlety. Like if a movie like clobbers me over the head,
Hmm.
it's probably not my thing. I'm not like an action adventure sort of girl usually. Though there are formulaic movies, I like noir quite a bit. I really like noir,
Hmm.
but generally I like subtlety.
I think also what's so great about Jesse and Celine is that they're both very intelligent people. They're well read, they're educated, they have a lot of thoughts and ideas. When he talks about this 24-hour basically like reality show, which we didn't have reality shows at the time. That's just this idea that just like came out of his head, and I loved hearing all of his ideas. There's that great moment where they're walking through like the park or the cemetery and they see the gravestone, and she has this really beautiful moment where she says that the girl who died when she was 13, she's still 13. They're two people who are attracted to each other, not just because of their looks, but because of their brains.
The
And
fresh
that,
ideas.
and that was kind of a revelation for me at the time. Very few movies are like this movie, and by extension Before Sunset and Midnight, and especially in the 90s when I'm growing up with like action movies and big dramas and silly comedies. Those are all great as well, but then this tiny little movie about these two people connecting comes along, and it becomes like the most important thing to me. And plus, I had a relationship a couple years later where that I met this girl in university, and it was like we started dating the last 2 or 3 months of the school year. And I knew at the end of the school year, I had to go back to Vancouver and she had to go back to
Right.
Toronto. And that's what happened. And so there
The
was
ticking clock. The
it was the
ticking
ticking
clock.
clock. Yeah, it was the ticking clock. Yeah.
Well, so when you're describing there what you liked about Jesse talking about basically a reality show before, that's so Rick.
Mm.
That's Rick. I mean, because he thinks that way, thought that way, very, he's a self-taught film expert.
Yeah.
And then you describe the Celine character in the cemetery. That's me,
Mm.
because I'm kind of an existentialist, just thinking of these big, like, the tragedy of the girl dying, and she, like, to have your clock stop at age 13, and that's a tragedy, but also that's the sort of thing Celine would think about. So
Yeah.
you're talking about a guy who's coming up with ideas all the time based on his love of film, and a female who's thinking of these, like the meaning kind of issues.
Yeah. Yeah. And my wife is similar to me in ways, but also not similar to me in many ways. And I think the people that we meet in life, the people that we're most attracted to, friends will connect over our love of movies or
Right.
whatever it is. But it feels like the people that we pick as our partners are sometimes not like us in many ways.
Uh-huh.
And that's what attracts us to them, what they've experienced, what they know that they can teach us, and vice versa.
You know what I've heard about this is that when you first meet somebody that you really connect with, you find where you're alike and you're all about those likenesses. And then the next stage is finding where you're different. And then the next stage is facing the same direction, knowing that you're different, but you're trying to face the same goal. And I think people get stuck for a long time in the differences area.
Yeah.
And so that's where they find out sometimes, I don't like their differences.
Right.
I don't want to deal with their differences.
Yeah.
you know?
So looking behind you, your bookshelf is filled with books, and behind me, I got VHS movies. And that makes me think about, like you said in the beginning, people have this nostalgia for this time before the internet. What's your experience of making movies at that time in the mid 90s versus how things are today?
Rick himself kind of cracked things open a bit with Slacker. I mean, it wasn't the huge sensation when it came out, but there were independent people trying to break away from the studio system. And don't get me wrong, I love the studio system. I'm fascinated by the birth of this, whole factory system. And in the early 20th century, they gave birth to stories on the screen. But I think the 90s, I remember being all about going to the little theater, which was, going to these little theaters. And I missed some of the big blockbustery films at that point. I was trying to see the more independent films. Right now, I kind of wonder, everything seems thrown up in the air at the moment, because there's even a belief that Hollywood may be dying altogether because,
right.
That, it may be dying altogether. And you think it's like an art form that's only 100 years old.
Yeah. So
stories, of course, have been around for forever, as long as we've had language. But the art form is changing. I think it might be getting much shorter. We might get to the point, and it might be just sequential till the end of time, which is great for me. I love the diary, so it's just sequential until you die. Yeah. But I think there are a lot of huge changes happening right now.
You've posted a lot of photos on Instagram. That's how you and I connected, of your time on set making the film. What was the experience like making the film? Did you guys feel like you had freedom to make it the film, or did you have kind of a studio kind of breathing down your neck? What was that like?
I think there was a lot of freedom because it was very, very inexpensive. Rick found the financing in Europe. And they have, how they have these deals in these countries where they want to bring the work to their country, and if they will give you some assistance, some through the, so they have. That's why so many films are made in these beautiful European cities that kind of mimic other cities. Like, oh, we want to have like London in the 40s. The thing is made in Poland or whatever. You know how they do that a lot. So it was very, very inexpensive. I remember meeting these producers on set, and they seemed very relaxed. They seemed like intellectuals. They seemed, as far as art went, they seemed to be giving Rick and the filmmakers and I was faxing a lot of ideas to Rick. I was like, the whole, the spider thing, and I was like, where the female spider eats the male spider.
Oh, yeah.
I was just like I think I was reading a lot of science back then, and I read about like the females who mate with the males and then they destroy them. And so I was like, ha ha ha, this will make a great conversation.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's exactly the sort of thing that Celine would think is hilarious, because I think it's hilarious. And so there was a lot. It's not like things were locked down in a hardcore way, but he had also done that with Dazed and Confused to a large degree, and of course with Slacker. So there was a lot of freedom. And it's funny because those, as like a playwright who's putting something on the stage, the playwright is God, and people don't deviate even a word. And in the old days of making films for the studios in Hollywood, they didn't deviate even one word from the scripts.
Right.
So it was a more things were loosening up in a way.
Speaking of Dazed and Confused, since you mentioned it, you have this very memorable scene as this teacher who gives this great little speech / warning to her students as they're leaving for the summer that, of course, is so iconic, and we share it on social media every July 4th. But you also have this other little moment where Dawson, the student, hits on you and asks if you would hook up with him during the summer, and you just kind of pat him on the head. How did this character come about, and how did these little moments come about for you?
This was the first time I had to audition for a bigger movie, where I had to audition in front of the Hollywood casting director. And that was kind of frightening for me, because the only acting I'd ever done was in Slacker. And, but basically I remember Rick gave me the scene so that I could go audition for it. And I remember pacing around in my house, trying to get into the feeling of it. Of course, what that is called the method. I was just trying to imagine, like, how would I feel? And I imagined that scene at the door with Dawson. And I imagined, like, what would happen if somebody did that? What would I want to do? And I was like, I would want to pat them on the head. It wasn't written in the script. And I really wish I would not have done that during rehearsals, because it gave the actor, Sasha, it gave him a heads up as to what was coming. And his initial raw reaction was so great, and I blew it by doing it in the rehearsal. So I know, never do that again, Kim. Just save it. That's actually what, like, I found out later, that's what Elizabeth Taylor did, is that she did not come out with everything in the rehearsals. She would just do a walkthrough and she'd save the emotion.
Was the speech that you give to the kids as they're leaving, was that written by him, or
Yeah.
It was, yeah.
That was written by him.
It's so great.
Thanks. Yeah, pretty much word for word. Yeah, he wrote that, and that is very, very Rick. That he, I think, as you can tell from the character of Jesse in Before Sunrise, he is a lot more cynical than either Celine or me. He's a lot more cynical. And so that would be the sort of thing he would say to the kids as they're leaving class on the last day of school is, our country is based on people wanting to avoid taxes. I think Celine or Kim would have been, a lot more kind of idealistic about the country and about the founding fathers and the Declaration of Independence and all that sort of stuff. But Rick, so I had to kind of absorb Rick's ethos, that he was a more cynical sort of guy. And it's funny how that line that she gives to the students as they're walking out, I get a lot of yes from people for that line who think that that's me. It's I was playing a character, but they think it's me. I also get a huge mass of heat for that. I get a ton of people, like, I guess they think I'm that this is a real person who hates the country.
Sure, right. Well, it's just delivered so naturally and so kind of off the cuff that it feels real. As you're speaking, I'm thinking of, and we're talking about Before Sunrise and Dazed. The things that blow me away about Dazed, especially in Before Sunrise and some of his other films, are that the characters, they're not just talking; they have real points of view and real like opinions and perspectives on things. Pink's character in Dazed, he is really fighting against the establishment of the school with this memo that they get throughout the film.
That movie, I lived in Texas for 15 years. That's how I was in Austin. I met Rick. But the movie is so about that Texas manhood, pledging to the tribe thing. You can really feel that, or I could when I was living there. I felt it when like crossing the border into Texas. I felt this tribal manhood thing, and these are high school students. So there's nobody more tribal in this world than teenagers. With their, right? They have like, you're a this or you're a that. You've got even your word for it. Like, I'm a punk, or I'm an athlete, I'm a jock, I'm a this, I'm a that. And of course, as you get older, it all becomes much more subtle and diversified, and you spread out more, and you become friends with different sorts. But oh my God, at that age in Texas, his whole fight for his individuality is a really interesting fight. Rick was a good athlete. He was a baseball guy. But I distinctly remember fighting that fight, even in early adulthood, fighting the fight of like Austin is a beautiful little town that is sort of this bastion of liberals in this red state. And I've always felt like, I like subtlety. I like being open-minded. There was always this like declare your tribe.
Yeah, right.
Thing.
Right. What do you stand for?
What do you stand for? And I felt that so much in Texas, but also in Austin, I felt that. And I'm imagining that is where a lot of that came from in that script. And then you see the diversification. Like, I love the way that McConaughey's character likes the redheaded girl, because he goes a direction you're not expecting.
Yes.
And it gives subtlety to the story. That's a detail I really love.
Yes, I do too. I could watch, if I was on a desert island and I only had Before Sunrise and Dazed and Confused, like, no problem. I could watch them every day.
I love that.
I want to talk about screenwriting. So you teach screenwriting, and do you teach screenwriting from character, plot, dialogue? What's your focus?
Definitely, I'm interested in starting with character, but I'm interested in starting with the character of the student. So I feel like things roll out of the student's consciousness, and oftentimes they're in the subconscious of the student. So what I love to do right away on day one is to play around with the student's subconscious, and I like to come at it in a roundabout way so that they're not expecting to reveal what they reveal. But then once they do, they see how magical their own subconscious is, and that they can basically rely to a large degree on the magic of that subconscious to give them ideas as we go through the process. And they start like really dreaming about the characters. And, I find that it all rolls out very naturally over the course of the story,
Yeah.
So to a large degree, I start with character and subconscious.
And what do you find that most young writers today, like, what are their biggest struggles?
Oh, well, definitely the internet and social media has done a number on concentration and attention span. So right away, I start working on that and start showing them ways to calm the mind. And they don't sometimes even realize how agitated our phones can make us, how much anxiety and even depression that we can have from always being plugged in. And so I start giving them exercises in class to get them calm and in that zone of creativity. And they often thank me. Sometimes at first they're agitated because it's like I'm taking them off of a drug.
Right.
And sometimes they're like, I'm like, put your phone away, and they're like, ah! It's like they can't have their drug. But then they thank me and say, God, I feel better.
Yeah.
I feel so much better. As I was like, this is where we used to be more. When I was younger, we used to be in this zone more. So now you've got some tools to get there, because that's where all your good ideas are going to come from, is that beautiful zone of calm that's underneath the agitation.
Yes. And do you teach in person and online?
I do teach. I teach in person at a college here in Los Angeles. I'm going to be teaching in person in Paris later this summer.
I wanted to plug this.
Oh, thank you. It's called Screenwriting with Kim Krizan in Paris. Thank you for it's. If people check me out on Instagram, they can see I've got the info there. Thank you very much. And I also have a little subscription thing on Patreon. It's called the Magic Hour, where you can get little inspirational videos, very, very inexpensive. So thank you very much for that.
Okay, great. Yeah. So before we continue, I want to show you a couple things. So I have my VHS of Before Sunrise.
Yeah.
And I have my VHS of Love Story. So I had not seen Love Story before. It was one of those movies where I was either too young or too old, or didn't quite know what it was. And so I watched it really for the first time this week. Can you tell me why you picked Love Story?
So I saw Love Story as a rerun on television every year when I was a teenager, because the movie came out in 1970 when I was too young. It was a sensation, a phenomenon.
Yeah.
And it was on rerun, and I watched it by myself, and it killed me every single year. Of course, it was, it was a huge, huge movie at the time, that it's very formulaic. People might say it's formulaic or hokey or overly, cheesy. I still love it. I still love it.
Yeah.
It's based on a novel by Eric Siegel. But when you have to imagine me watching it when I'm there, like maybe 11 years old or 12 years old or 13, with my little TV tray, and I have my little TV dinner, because I don't know, my parents maybe they went out or something, so I stay home with my TV tray. And that first bit where he's sitting in the bleachers and it's just snow, and you hear the poignant piano music, and he says it's about a girl who loved Beethoven and Bach and the Beatles and me, he says. I mean, but he's alone in the snow, the snow.
Yeah.
And then it starts moving. It's like that story starts moving, and right?
Yeah. That was, I was surprised how not stodgy the movie is for being from 1970.
Yeah.
And yes, there are parts that feel slow, I guess, compared to today's films. But like you said, the movie opens not with Oliver walking into the library, not with a scene establishing who Oliver is in his life. it comes in right in the middle of their conversation where he's meeting Jenny in the library. And then every scene for like the next 10, 15 scenes is them together, getting to know each other. And in similar ways to Before Sunrise, they don't quite connect right away. They kind of poke at each other. And, I was really caught off guard by that.
Did you notice? Okay, you notice how they have all these quick little cuts.
Yes.
Where he's trying to get a book. She's being snappy with him. He's like, "Why are you being snappy with me? Like, if you're so, she's like, if you're so smart," and he's like, "If you're so, great," and they're feisty right away.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wouldn't go to coffee with you. Cut. They're at coffee together.
Right.
It's fresh. It doesn't feel like, you're right. It doesn't feel stodgy. It feels fresh. It feels fun.
Yeah.
And then they're still snappy with each other. But obviously I think she lured him in with her snappiness.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
I love all those fun little twists and turns that get them together that are surprising.
Yes. Yes.
It's really
and it speaks
fun.
to what we were saying about Before Sunrise, which is these are real people with real perspectives and experiences.
Yeah.
She's this kind of smart aleck from Radcliffe. He's this kind of rich guy's son who, kind of hates that he's the rich guy's son, but he can't help but be a little above it all, or a little I don't know, hoity-toity, or on his high horse. And you're right, they immediately kind of go at each other with he says something as she's walking to her dorm. He's like, "You something Radcliffe bitch."
Yeah.
And that doesn't turn her off. That actually attracts her more to him,
Yeah, and he says it again when they're married, but he's saying it tongue in cheek and she's laughing. Yeah, it's really interesting. Some of the things that are, kind of politically incorrect are sort of charming in the movie. Yeah, I love it. Okay, so also there's that whole, the Romeo and Juliet aspect is pretty pronounced with her being a poor girl, him being a rich boy. But I something I love is his rebellion against the father. That would have been, right? Yes. Especially then in 1970, the culture was all about rebellion against the man. And his feistiness, which we see right away when he's playing ice hockey. He's in the penalty box because he's he's playing dirty, and his dad saw that. Or it's not that he was playing dirty. It was that he couldn't control his passions. And I think what that whole hippie era was about was let your passions out. Quit being a hypocrite. Let your passions out. And so he is not a hypocrite. He lets his passions out. And they find that in each other because she's not a hypocrite. He's not a hypocrite. They find each other because that's their essential soul, is that we're real. Yeah.
Yes. And it's funny when he's in the penalty box and she's kind of bugging him and he just tells her to go away, all these little bits, calling her a bitch, her calling him preppy, the ways that they poke at each other feel, more relatable than if the characters were just kind of sanded down and just kind of plugged into this, Harvard milieu with the rich dad. You could see how it just could have been a lot more stock and unmemorable than what it became.
I rewatched it again myself here because, of course, I saw it when I was a kid on television, but I rewatched it again to talk to you about it. And I thought that it was very modern at the time to have her be as tough as she was.
Yes.
Like how she at the very end, I don't know how much we're going to blow for people. I don't want to blow too much, but
I mean, it's a
you know,
55-year-old movie, so I think we're okay.
yeah, yeah. How at the very end, how she's saying, I don't want your tears, get the
Hmm.
hell out. I think I can't remember her exact words, but she's like, get the hell out if you're going to give me your tears sort of talk. And I think nowadays, maybe there's something about we're trying to show our vulnerability with each other. I think in 1970 it would have been very modern for a young woman to not show tears, to
Hmm.
say, don't give me your tears, Barrett, get the hell out,
Yeah.
and so I thought it was very perfect for the time, but I like it for our time too because it feels like fresh now.
Yeah. Skipping to the end, my I, I had this feeling that the last 20 minutes or so kind
Yeah.
of yada yadas her illness and kind
Yeah.
of sidelines her as a character. Even her death is off screen. What do you think of that? Do you have a problem with that, or do you just go along with it?
It's very quick. I agree with you. And so I thought about this issue of the death being very quick. And I thought this time while I was watching it, I thought, you know what? It's Oliver's movie.
Mm,
It's his story. We start with him, we end with him. He does not want to dwell on her death. It passes like a nightmare for him. And so the choice to go through it fast, but end with his reconnection with the father, because his arc was
yes.
that his arc is that Jenny taught him love means never having to say you're sorry. And that goes not only to her, but also to the father, because through Jenny, he learns that he loves his father. And his father may not have expressed it properly and may have tried to control him. Oliver was not to be controlled. He proved that. But now the father has come back because his father cares, even though he doesn't know how to show it very well. His father, when he found out, went rushing to the hospital because he cares.
Mm,
And I love how they see each other through the turnstile thingy, which we don't have so much anymore,
hmm.
that the glass turnstile. They see each other because one's going in, one's going out, but then they find each other, and and the father says, I'm sorry, and Oliver says, love means never having to say you're sorry. So he's recycling what he learned. But I know exactly what you mean. Like, why gloss over Jenny and her death? And I thought, okay, let me give this to the filmmakers. It's Oliver's story.
Hmm.
Let Oliver gloss over the ugliest thing that ever happened to him in his whole life because it's too painful. I think that's why they did it.
Mm, mm. That makes sense. I love that moment with his father because with him saying love means never having to say you're sorry, he's essentially saying to his dad, I love you.
Yes.
And his dad, who is very cold and emotionless throughout the whole movie, in the last shot, you see him well up with tears, and it becomes and it's kind of all we need to know that that character he's changed.
came to, came to fruition.
Yeah,
He's come to it. It helped him grow as well to
he's
have his
grown.
rebellious son say he loved him, because that's the thing. He turned 60 years old, and so he didn't grow up with a bunch of "I love you" crap,
Right. Right.
like he couldn't say it, and his son said it to him, and it made him cry. Yeah, it's a beautiful growth moment for the father too.
Yes, it is. And also one of the things I noticed is that I had thought, oh, it's a movie about these two characters who date and then she gets sick and like that. But the movie moves through their relationship very quickly, and the idea of them getting married after what seems like not very long of
Yeah.
much time of dating, was that common at the time? Was that like a very like 70s-ish thing for people to just get married because they felt love without actually going through a couple of years of being in a relationship.
They got married when they were younger, for
Yeah.
sure. I think it was more common for people to get married in their 20s. I think, yeah, definitely my parents' generation, they got married like in college or right after college.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think that that would have been kind of the norm. The only thing is I think about, okay, 1970,
Yeah.
they were throwing out a lot of norms. And so, you know how when Jenny and Oliver are talking to her father and they're saying, listen, Phil, we don't want to do the whole church thing. We're negative on the whole God thing. I was like, that rings very true. I was a child at that time, 1970, I was a child. But I remember that a lot of things were being thrown out the window.
Mm-hmm.
And that I would overhear the adults kind of talking that way. So I wasn't really old enough yet to totally get that, but that rang true. Getting married in college would ring true because I don't think people were living together, living in sin.
Right.
There was so much talk with my mother and her friends about I'm gonna not say this correctly, but girls shouldn't live with their boyfriends because it's giving the milk away for free. And it's like giving the cow away for free or some,
Yeah.
It's like, oh, it's such an ugly thing to. But there was a lot of talk like that. Like, don't you live with a man because all they want, it's like,
Right.
it was just like, you're still a commodity. And that was the sort of thinking in the 1950s for sure. But it's like we're entering the 70s now, where women are not going to think of themselves as commodities anymore. They're going to think of themselves as equals, equal partners. So there was a lot of that feeling for me in this movie. And I think that by the time we get to Before Sunrise, I feel like they're equals.
Yeah. Absolutely. There's this incredible editorial moment where they're on the couch. So just the two of them on the couch, right? He's laying down, she's on his chest. They're both reading. They're both reading books and studying, right? And then she says, I love you. And then it cuts to them in the snow, where he basically, like, his reaction to being told I love you is him going, oh, and he falls back into the snow. And then you have this, like, it feels like 2, 3, 4 minute sequence of them just like frolicking in the snow, like almost like wrestling. And it's very intimate. Like you said, at one point she's like licking the snow off his face. And it's just so different than what you expect.
That quick cut.
Yes, that quick cut.
I love it. Looks like he was shot.
Yes.
The way he looks cross-eyed and then he falls back in the snow. Yeah, that it totally works. It right. And then you're right. The scene in the snow is like a montage that goes on forever.
Yeah.
Of joy, a joy in the snow.
Did you know that the film was the last movie to be shot at Harvard? Because,
what?
Yes, it was such a disruption that they kicked them out after a week. And so other movies that have been set at Harvard, like The Social Network, were not allowed to shoot at the school.
I did not know that.
Yeah, I learned that in my research.
Isn't it a great set? It's beautiful.
Perfect, yeah.
It's so romantic. I love the fact, like, all these students learning, and she's studying music and classical music, and it just feels so romantic to me to be with all these young people who are learning.
Yeah.
That's inherently romantic.
Yeah, there's a really long take where they're walking, I guess, from class to class, and you see the buildings around them, and she's pointing out Barrett Hall, and they have all this dialogue, and the camera doesn't cut in the typical way. You're very much with them, and they feel, the thing I love about long takes or oneers, not when they're stunt oneers, but you can really feel the characters being together as they would in life. And Rick does a lot of that in Before Sunrise as well. like one of the most famous is when they're on the train and they're just sitting there in the back row. And that's just something I love in filmmaking, is when you feel like you're really with people interacting, not just cut, 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 cut.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. For a cheesy, supposedly cheesy mainstream
Yeah.
movie, I think it's really powerful and touching, you
Yeah,
know?
it is.
It doesn't like you can see why this was all over television. It was just reruns on television that a kid could watch. There, I mean, a little bit of limited, very, very limited cursing, no graphic, anything.
Yeah.
And it's just beautiful. It's a great
Yeah.
movie. And I had never thought of it juxtaposed against my movie, Before Sunrise. I'd never thought of it. So to meet with you, I did that on purpose. And I was like, oh, and I thought, gosh, I think it's Oliver's movie. And then I thought, Before Sunrise to some degree is Celine's movie. I'm not 100%. I know it's a buddy film. I mean, too,
Yeah.
but to some large degree, it's Celine's movie because she comes into, I just feel like we start with her, we kind of end with her. Not as overtly one character as say Love Story, but you made me think about it because I had never ever thought of it that way, because to me, this is like the gold.
Yeah.
And I don't think about my movie that much. I really don't, and I definitely don't analyze it.
Sure.
So when you talk about it, it makes me think. When you're like, let's talk about a movie. Which one do you want to do? This one. I was like, okay, that gave me a whole new angle.
I'm great. I'm glad to hear that. I love. It's a movie love story that I thought, oh, okay, I'll just watch this. But how should I say this? I love the joy of discovering something in a movie, whether it's a new movie or a movie that's 50 or 100 years old. There's something that we can learn from every movie, whether it's good or bad. And there's something about these two movies, Before Sunrise and Love Story, that are at their core about two people connecting. And that is, in some ways, what life is all about. If you want to get big and grand, that's what life is all about. It's about connecting with people.
Absolutely.
Yes. And that's all that matters, really.
That's 100%. 100%. It's simple. It's a very simple thing. And whether you don't have the technology, like, Before Sunrise, we didn't have that, or we do, like we can talk through Zoom, or through through the computer. It's just, that's what people want is human connection. So it's an amazing thing.
And then what these movies do so great, especially Before Midnight, is once you have that connection, can you hold on to it?
Yeah.
Right. How do we maintain that connection? How do we keep that connection strong? Of course, we love watching characters come together, but also what Love Story is great at is showing them not just come together, but be together through tough times, and to see how they support each other or don't support each other. And that's just as valuable.
Absolutely. And you can, extrapolate. The whole world is trying to hold it together right now. People are trying to hold it together and to maintain, like, can we communicate, respect one another, agree on things? Do we have to fight? All these issues, like, are our differences the paramount thing, or can we communicate with one another and respect one another? It's huge.
Yes, it is. Well, Kim, thank you so much for spending your time with me and for talking about these movies. I just so appreciate it. I so appreciate you for all the work you've done and for talking to me during this time. It's been so great.
My pleasure, David. I had a lot of fun talking to you. It was really fun for me to rewatch Love Story and talk about that with you, and especially in conjunction to Before Sunrise. I loved it.
Yeah, great.
Okay.
All right. Talk to you later.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay. Thank you to Kim Krizan for being on the show. That was so special for me. What a great conversation we had. If you're enjoying the VHS Revolution show, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel, share it with your friends, leave me a comment. I've got so many great episodes coming up. I'm talking to such amazing people, filmmakers, writers, directors, some classic movies being talked about. So I hope you keep coming back. I'm working on getting to 4,000 watch hours. Thank you for supporting me in my goal. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you next time.